Hello there. My name is Monica Burns, and welcome to Technology Essentials and Education. On today's episode, we're tackling the challenge of creating uncheatable assessments in the age of AI, and my guest is Michael Hernandez. He's a fellow ISTE and ASCD author, an Apple Distinguished Educator, and a former classroom teacher based in California. We dive into a really practical conversation about what it truly means to support students in a learning environment where AI tools are at their fingertips. This episode is a must listen if you're looking for strategies to design assessments that measure student learning. Let's go ahead and dive in. This episode is brought to you by Jotform. Jotform provides an all-in-one solution to streamline administrative tasks, enhance community engagement, and foster innovation. Using their no-code drag-and-drop forms and workflows, your teams can securely collect and store data, automate tasks, and collaborate on team resources. Educational institutions are also eligible for a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. Welcome to the podcast, Michael. I'm so excited to talk about creating uncheatable assessments in the age of AI. And before we get into all of that, would love for listeners to hear a bit about your role in education. What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so I'm Michael Hernandez. I am a former high school teacher in the Los Angeles area where I taught for 26 years, teaching journalism and digital storytelling. And so now I am leaning into consulting and speaking and talking about my books and my published works to help other educators manage and survive these challenging times. So whether that's AI, stuff that's happening with student engagement, sort of taking best practices that I've learned and that other teachers are doing to support what teachers are doing in the classroom right now.
Amazing. And, we're going to talk about assessments, particularly uncheatable assessments, which is a term from the title of one of your publications. But before we get into that piece, would love to hear a little bit about your thinking on assessment. How has your thinking about assessment evolved as AI tools have become more accessible to students and even to teachers?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started teaching, teaching is all about assessment, right? So much revolves around that. And that's the worst part of teaching, honestly,
Mhm.
right? You're afraid you're going to make a mistake, you're going to hurt someone's feelings. The kids are motivated or deflated by the grades that they get. We always struggle to find a way that's going to be meaningful and accurate. And you can never really win. And it's
Mhm.
always been a challenge. And, now with, first it was, online searches and
Mhm.
cameras from cell phones, and now it's artificial intelligence. And so the landscape of traditional assessments is uh, is changing. It kind of has to.
Mhm.
And I think instead of looking at it as, an existential threat to our identities as educators or our careers that we've built around how to do this, we've become very efficient and good at what we do. I feel like in my classroom, it was like an opportunity to sort of reevaluate, what do I really mean by assessment? And is this really working in the first place? And I feel like we get into the rhythm of doing
Mhm.
something for so long that you just kind of take it for granted that this is the one and only way to do it. And it's hard to see opportunities and
Yeah.
possibilities. And so it's really forcing us to take a good hard look at what is the best way to assess all students and do it in a way that's equitable
Mhm.
and still rigorous and still aligned to standards. And so I've really been drawn to this idea of more student-centered kinds of learning,
Mhm.
where it's based on agency and student inquiry and asking questions and engaging with the world, because that's the kind of learning that I like to have. I don't like someone to just drop a PDF to me and say memorize this and take a test. That's disconnected from my
Yeah.
life. I want to know that what I'm doing, the effort that I'm putting into the work, has some meaning and purpose to me and the people around me. And our students are no different, right? They really do want to make a difference in the world, and they really do care what you and their friends and their family and their community think. And, if we're going to ask them to put in all of this effort and energy and stress, over our assignments, shouldn't it be for a good purpose? Shouldn't we be able to say to them, this is the reason you're doing it, and you can see how it's
Mhm.
having an impact on other people? And so that's a big shift for a lot of us because it's hard to manage that. What does that look like in the classroom? And how do you standardize that? And I think that's sort of the crux of the problem is trying to quantify learning, put a number on everything. And I mean, we're kind of forced to do that by standardized test companies
Mhm.
and policymakers. And you look at how schools are evaluated, or if you're a parent, you're like, which school should I send my kid to? And you look
Mhm.
at the websites for parents, the best schools. It's based on
Right.
test scores. It's not based on other evidence. And so I want to create an experience for my students that is meaningful and something that I would want to do, and something that is also rewarding at the same time. And kind of mixed in there is this idea that we've sort of conflated pain and suffering with good learning.
Mhm.
We say rigor, and what do we really mean by that? That it's painful, or that you just have to slog through it, right? And yes, learning has to be a struggle. There's
Right.
no way around that. It's got to be wrestling with the ideas or the concepts and figuring it out. But it doesn't have to be pain and suffering just for the sake of it, And the analogy that I like to use is, if you are an athlete, if you ever played sports in high school or college, or you're a musician and you played in the band, or maybe you're a professional musician now, think about the hours of training that you went into, the weight training, the conditioning, the drills that you ran, the scrimmages, maybe you like sprained an ankle or a broken arm or something like that. Why would you put yourself through all of that stress and pain and suffering? It's because you're passionate about it and you care about it. And so, how might we borrow some of that same passion for the assignments that we give our students? And so, that's kind of what I've really been working on and put into my book, Storytelling with Purpose.
Mhm.
And then took a chapter in there on assessment and spun that out into an online course called Uncheatable Assessments, where it helps educators kind of walk through that process, both in terms of the mindset behind it and
Yeah.
also the logistics of this is what it looks like in a classroom.
And just that, shift that you've explained here, right? Of just the shift in thinking that so many educators are starting to have on what it means to get strong data that informs instruction, which is the whole point, right, of assessing. We think about it from a classroom practice, although, as you mentioned, there's a lot of external factors that are influencing, right? I need a number or I need something that feels really specific, right, in terms of how kids are progressing. We know it's so much more complicated to get that full picture. And when you talk with educators and they're navigating these disruptions that are happening, I'm not sure, it sounds like a scary word, but it is disruptive when we think of some of these new tech tools on the scene. What concerns around AI and assessment come up most often when you talk to other educators? What are you hearing?
Yeah, yeah, it's a really tough time to be a teacher right now for all the reasons.
Yeah.
And then throw AI into the mix, you're like, oh my God. So any
Mhm.
class where you're assessing students primarily on text, with text-based assessment, so essays, reports, worksheets, that kind of thing, is under direct threat with AI, but not the only ones, because you can use AI to solve math problems now by using your camera. And
Mhm.
I taught like journalism, so photography and images can be also faked and created. So
Mhm.
not just text, it's everything. And so really what I'm hearing from a lot of educators, they're concerned about this idea of cheating. Kids aren't going to do the work, whatever that means.
Mhm.
They're just going to take a shortcut to turn something in. And I think that's really the biggest concern. And I think that's absolutely true, and we have to acknowledge that. And I would say, let's pull back for a second and say, what do we mean by cheating? First of all.
Mhm.
And then why would someone cheat, right? And instead of thinking of cheating as a moral depravity or something where a student is a bad person, maybe we should start thinking about um, cheating as managing scarce resources,
Mhm.
right? So how many times have you cut corners?
Mhm.
Right? Like I didn't follow the traffic laws, and I
Right.
went faster than the speed limit because I was in a hurry to get somewhere. Or, maybe you used AI to help you draft an email to someone, right?
Mhm.
There are many times in our lives when we cut corners, not because we're bad, evil people that are criminals, but because we don't like you or don't believe in the rule of law. It's maybe because there's something else I have to navigate that's really important. And, kids are overwhelmed with
Mm-hmm.
work. Their lives are overscheduled. There's a lot of high pressure, high stakes assessments that are on them to do well, both, with their peers by comparison, with the pressure they're getting from home or, applications for college and so forth. And so I think we need to start with that. And then, like I talk about in the course, is the two pieces that make an assignment like cheatable, right? And this goes back to how we're going to help educators solve this problem is students cheat by incentive, like there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason to cheat or they want to. And then the other part is the assignment itself is designed to be cheatable,
Mm-hmm.
right? So let's start with that part. If your assignment has or asking the students to come up with the exact same answer at the same time, you've just set yourself up for cheating
Right.
because the answer is shareable or searchable, right? So we got to reconfigure that a little bit and move towards assignments where the assignments are original, one-of-a-kind artifacts that
Yeah.
can't be faked or copied by somebody else. Then the other piece is probably the most fundamental piece because students have cheated since the beginning of time,
Mm-hmm.
right? They always will, and they always have. So what can we do to minimize or disincentivize the cheating? And so what I've had luck with, and a lot of educators that I speak with have had a lot of luck with, is this idea of creating assignments that students want to complete or
Mm-hmm.
see some kind of value in. Now, I'm not saying do whatever you want. I think
Mm-hmm.
that when I first started teaching, I'm like, no, you just got to do it. You just got to learn your multiplication tables. You just got to do these
Right.
things. Yeah, and absolutely, you have to know certain things. What I'm saying is, can we make a sandbox with very clear delineated boundaries and say, these are my expectations? And within that, you have agency to do what you want to get the result that we need, right? So that's what we're kind of talking about is scaffolding and creating these cultures where students are trusted with the ideas and information. They're trusted with running with it and coming up with something unique and original. And so in my assessment, one of my criteria is originality. One of my
Mm-hmm.
criteria is creativity. One of my criteria is impact. Does this artifact that you've created affected other people in some way? And trying to borrow what you and I experience as parents or professionals, or we see in the real world, in the business world, or in the scientific community, like what's the measure of success for a business, right? It's not following the rules, it's finding a path that is original and unique to become successful and create a product for someone else that's going to help them in their lives. And so, how can we sort of sculpt assignments to address both of those things, both cheatable by design and cheatable through incentive?
I think those are such great ways to unpack that term because for educators who are, in an environment where for their secondary students, for their elementary students perhaps, right, this generative AI, right, is just a click away, right? They can access it pretty quickly, maybe on a school device, but for sure, right, on a device they have access to at home. A quick note from the presenter of today's episode, Jotform. Jotform lets you build a form in minutes. Student survey forms, homework submission forms, online quizzes, and so much more. You can start from scratch, or if you want to get a head start, check out their collection of free form templates designed with teachers, schools, and districts in mind. Learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. So, could you give us an example of, what a project or assessment might look like, maybe from your own classroom experience or one from one of your students or, in your course or in other places that you've talked to? What does it look like to set up kids for success with a original artifact of their learning?
Yeah, and so I would sort of frame it also that, anytime we ban something or tell kids that they can't use it is a problematic situation and a relationship that I don't want to build. I don't want to
Right.
have an antagonistic relationship with my students. I want them to trust me and I want to be able to trust them. I shouldn't be policing them and wasting my energy and time doing that, trying to catch them at something rather than spending that energy encouraging them to produce something constructive. So I'd start with that piece is like whatever you feel is going to be most appropriate for your grade level, and your resources and where you are in the school year. You should be embracing these tools to first of all acknowledge that you acknowledge the real world and that
Right.
these
Yeah.
things exist and that you and your class have relevance. And I think that's the big thing that I'm seeing is that kids come in and to school and it doesn't look anything like the real world.
Right.
Everything's sanitized. And so we need to, first of all, embrace that. Now, what does that look like practically and realistically? So, what's an original artifact? A really easy one that I have in my book is a really easy pivot. If you ask students to create a class presentation already, which most teachers do of some
Right.
kind, right?
Hmm.
They have to create a slide deck, they go up in front of the class and they present on a definition or a project they did or a research project. Just have them use an app to record that presentation with their voiceover. And that's a simple way. It's the exact same curriculum, exact same content, the exact same slides, even. They're just recording it. And now you have this recording of their voice, right? That unique person and their unique design of those slides, whatever that looks like
Hmm.
or criteria are for that. Now you have this artifact that is then shareable. And that's the key piece here is instead of making assignments just for the teacher, like you're in spy school
Hmm.
for your eyes
Yeah.
only, can you
Hmm.
ask the students or challenge them to create an artifact that can be shared and will be published for other people to see or use? And that puts the purpose behind it. Because otherwise, it's the same thing. It's like,
Oh,
well, I'm
yeah.
just doing this for a grade, so I'm just going to please the teacher and I don't really care. I'm just going to get by the minimum and I'm just going to move on. So instead, they're like, no, you have a choice. You can make this for your audience. Who are you making this for? Why are you explaining this? And then that adds incentive. It disincentivizes the reasons to cheat. And it's a very easy pivot, something that we're already familiar with and already do.
I love that example because it feels so attainable for someone who might be listening and says, "Oh, yeah, we definitely do presentations," or
Mhm.
"We have something that is kind of like that," or "There is something that kids are making, even in a Google Doc, where they could hit the screen record button, right, and talk through whatever it was that they made." And I think in these moments where there are disruptions, where things feel like, "Oh, there's so much gray area," or "I don't have control," right, the way I used to in the past, right? Something like that could help, someone who's listening take a practice that they already feel comfortable with and just add in this extra layer to it. And, one thing that I've found, I was just working with a group of educators in New York and we were talking about, right, the AI of it all, right, and getting teachers ready and thinking about what their daily practice looked like. We spent some time thinking about the process that students go through as opposed to the final product, right? We know the product's going to be a piece of it. Of course, we want to celebrate that thing students made. I love what you said about making something instantly shareable, right? To add that audience. So, for someone who's looking to lean in to the process, what strategies help students document their thinking or workflow so teachers can see, how the learning unfolds, not only or, in addition to that final product?
Yeah, I think I wrote about it in one of my recent newsletters, which is this idea of just relabeling your learning space from a classroom to a workshop or a studio, right? And I don't mean bring in glue and saws
Mhm.
and you don't need a 3D printer, but think about like a writer's workshop
Yeah.
or a think tank in social studies or science. Like, can you just reframe it in a way that we are all on a mission to come up with some new solution or on a quest for knowledge rather than can I memorize the facts accurately and take the test? It's instead,
Mhm.
can I think about what we're doing here as a means to help somebody else? I think that's the main thing to start with, right? And then, like the thing that you were saying is this fear of gray areas, like
Mhm.
letting students do their own thing. Like I mentioned earlier, set up a sandbox and like limitations,
Yeah.
expectations, whether that's quantity, time, accuracy, certain facts or processes that must be demonstrated, and then give them that time, that space to do that. Now, as far as tracking the process, when we
Mhm.
have a workshop format, you have different steps throughout the process. And I go into this in the book of starting up, first of all, with ideation, do some deep research, whether that's qualitative research, like we're doing right now,
Yeah.
having a
Mhm.
conversation is qualitative research, also known as rich data, or with traditional research with annotated bibliographies and stuff like I have my students do. finding the most interesting piece, coming up with an idea of like an idea prototype, run it past some peers. What do you think? Get some feedback. And this is all documented on whether it's Google Docs or something else that you're tracing and tracking their progress. And you
Mhm.
can see when they get the feedback, how they pivot and change throughout that process. So, and what's really nice about that is not only do you remove that high stakes pressure to come back in a week with a video, right?
Right.
Or how many times do we say, come back, maybe do a little bit of workshopping, but then it's like, come back with this essay completely done and your whole like grade is resting on this. You better get it right. Talk about stress and pressure. Of course, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use whatever tools I can to get that grade. Instead, we can see the process. The students can feel more empowered and comfortable with the learning process because ultimately we're trying to scaffold how to be a good learner out in the wild where no one is looking and there's no grade on the line.
Right.
Isn't that the whole
Mhm.
point of school? So we want these durable skills to be built as well, which are, critical thinking, the ability to give and receive constructive feedback, modifying. All of these things are incorporated as we work through this workshop model. And so in my book, I talk about the different steps of the process, whether that's designing your explainer video, which is the recorded
Right.
class presentation, or a podcast like this, or a digital book that you might be publishing in a language arts class, like a literary magazine.
Mhm.
There's different things like that. So I feel like I'm so glad you brought that up because the step-by-step progress is really important.
And I think as we're, looking at all the options that teachers have, this, idea of assessments, which already can feel intimidating, taking AI even out of the conversation, right, has only become more challenging. So I really appreciate you giving listeners these small wins, right? These small things that they can try, but also these big ideas that they can take maybe to a conversation with colleagues as they're planning out a new unit or new project. So just so many layers for them to consider. So Michael, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So you'd find me on LinkedIn. Also, my website, michaelhernandez.net. And I'm always sharing ideas and resources, workshops that I'm leading, articles I've published, and I love to work with schools on how to develop these mindsets. So I'm looking forward to doing that in the next year or so.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Monica.
It was lots of fun chatting with Michael today, so let's make this EdTech easy with a few key points from the episode. AI is forcing teachers to rethink traditional assessments and what they measure. Assessments become harder to cheat when students create original, personal artifacts. Giving students authentic audiences increases motivation and reduces shortcuts. Banning AI isn't realistic. Teaching students to use it responsibly builds trust and relevance. Make sure to check out the show notes for a full list of resources from today's episode, including all the ways to connect with Michael Hernandez. A big thank you to Jotform, the presenter of today's episode. To learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise, head to jotform.com/enterprise/education.